Chong students, this is Mr. Kelvin Tan. So the next video that we'll be going through, right? The next question we are going through will be basically Essay 5. That is the 2019 Econs A-Level Essay 5. This video is on 5A. So you can see that for these two essays that we are going through, right? They turn out in the same year. They appear in the same year, the same paper that was 2019 in the 2019. So there's essay 4, which is on inflation, and essay 5, which is the current essay that we are doing. This is the question. I'll let you read here again. So if I can see one similarity between this question and the question 4 is that you can see, right, there's a preamble for both questions. So if I ask you to compare, right, there are obviously many similarities. Number one, there's a preamble. And number two, the part A, right, is in a sense purely theoretical, just like essay 4. So when I ask you to explain what is meant by inclusive growth and sustainable growth, okay, it's purely theoretical. But if you look at part B, and now part B, right, again, it is more focused. The context is on Singapore, so it's not just a purely theoretical answer. You have to give some examples from the Singapore context. Is it possible for a small and open economy like Singapore to achieve both inclusive growth as well as sustainable growth? So this topic, right, that's tested in question 5 is clearly about inclusive growth and sustainable growth. So compared to question 4 is on inflation, this is on growth. Now here are my thoughts. If I think aloud when I look at this question, I have to say this. Your A-level paper 2, right? Not all essay questions are created equal. Remember, in your paper 2, you have a choice of essays. In your block test 1 that you will do in this after your June holidays, there will be a choice also. So this is where I would advise students, right, to choose, have a wise choice in your question selection. Now, if you ask me, right, if I'm the 2018 J1 who is doing the A-level in 2019, which is this question paper, and if I turn over the question paper when they say you may begin, okay, turn over, and I see question 4 and 5, right? If I were to choose one out of these two, I would rather choose question 4 than this question 5. Now, if you have reviewed the last two videos I've made about essay 4 before you come to this video, you do recognize that question 4, right, it is much easier to score analytical marks because you know, in a sense, what you need to write in order for the Cambridge markers to give you the analytical mark instead of the cursory. So question 4 is very clear. It's about the causes of inflation as well as the cures for inflation. Now we are typically very good at drawing ADAS and then use all the necessary econs terms to show analytical depth. But this question 5, right, is a bit different. Okay, so there will be years where Cambridge will set questions like this particular question 5, where I have to tell all my students that, if you're not careful, you may end up writing very descriptive answer. Because the inclusive growth, right, is about growth that basically benefits all the various people in the economy. So we do not just want growth, right, that only benefits the rich, that benefits the high income, that benefits the highly skilled. We want to make sure that the economic growth, right, the gains, the growth is spread out throughout the entire population, both rich and poor, both the highly skilled as well as the not so highly skilled. And we want growth to be sustainable. It means growth that doesn't destroy too much of the natural resources that we have. We do not want growth that leads to a lot of air pollution that can result in our health getting worse and worse. So that's about growth that is sustainable. Now, if you're not careful, right, you can write a very descriptive answer for both of them. So ideally, if you have a choice to do whether question 4 or 5, I would advise students to definitely pick question 4. But of course, there'll be some years where you are forced to do both questions. Okay, there are other questions are typically very hard, so you are forced to do this particular question, which is question 5. So how do you make sure that your answer falls less in the descriptive part and more towards the analytical part? Okay, our advice is to address both types of growth. Make sure you don't end up just talking about inclusive growth without sustainable growth, or sustainable growth without inclusive growth. Okay, so as a rule, right, please bias your selection of essays, right, questions on those that you are very clear about analytical depth. So look at question 4 and 5. 4 is definitely much easier. Okay, so as I said, question 8, if you're forced to do this essay 5, right, you know that the Cambridge markers want to see an explanation on what is inclusive growth, as well as an explanation on what is sustainable growth. So make sure you explain both. Now, to help you to gain analytical depth, right, I will strongly recommend students, right, to establish economic growth first, because in order for there to be inclusive growth, in order for growth to also be sustainable, you must have growth. Okay, it makes no sense to talk about inclusive and or as well as sustainable if there's no growth to talk about. So this is where I'll tell students that, if you want to easily show analytical marks, right, use the ADAS analysis, the ADAS diagram, to establish economic growth first. But of course, don't just stop there, because if you just stop at economic growth, right, the markers will say that you are not answering the question. Okay, so after you talk about growth, actual growth, potential growth, then you talk about how can you further make that growth inclusive as well as sustainable. So once you're clear about that, you can use the Gini coefficient, okay, to get, so you want to have real GDP growth together with a lower Gini coefficient to show that the economic growth you talk about, right, is more fairly, more equally distributed among both the rich and the poor. So focus on the Gini coefficient. For sustainable growth, right, you can talk about green GDP. So both the Gini coefficient as well as the green GDP, they are in your notes. So after you talk about actual growth, potential growth, do use these two terms when you talk about how to make the growth inclusive as well as sustainable. So this is basically the answer for part A. You can now understand what I mean when I say that question 4 is clearly more is we advise students to do question 4 rather than question 5, because question 4 for both A and B, right, it's quite clear how to write in greater analytical depth. But this 5A, right, you have to be careful. Okay, don't end up writing too descriptive. So again, give it a try, and I'll see you in the next video where we will tackle part B. Thank you.